We partnered with SAISD and are providing 25 caterpillar condos to be distributed to classrooms. Each of the caterpillar condos consists of a black pop-up mesh kit with a weed plant that will be able to sustain the caterpillar throughout its life until it becomes a monarch butterfly. It also has a tag that we'll use in order to turn that information into the University of Kansas at Lawrence. And we also provide access to a hands-on curriculum that we created at Texas Butterfly Ranch. We really dive into metamorphosis, migration, and citizen science. Citizen science is basically everyday citizens, that's you, that's me, participating in research and observation in the natural world around us, and then sharing that information with scientists so we can use that to determine the state of our ecosystem or populations of specific animals. So remember, use your mind to be curious and ask questions. Heart to care about the world around you. What I love the most is being able to take this information and find really creative ways to engage the community for opportunities to learn and to have experiences.
It's March in South Texas, and the first generation of monarch eggs have hatched into caterpillars. When they first emerge, the tiny caterpillars are white. Only after they consume milkweed, they take on their distinctive black, yellow, and white stripes, having absorbed chemicals from the milkweed plant that give them their bright color and protect them from predators. The tiny creatures begin a month-long transformation, feeding exclusively milkweed and increasing their body mass by 2,000 times while caterpillar.
We originally declared a state of local emergency, public health emergency, back on March 2nd. People's natural instincts were to get prepared and prepare themselves for holding up for an indefinite period of time. We also saw an abundance of volunteerism and generosity from people. Truly, it's through crisis that I think you see the best of San Antonio.
A chubby monarch caterpillar hangs, head down, from a milkweed stem in a J shape. Within minutes, the transformation is complete. The small mound of dark skin eventually drops, resembling a dead fly. A clever device to keep predators from consuming the prize of this spectacle. The monarch chrysalis now holds a butterfly to be. On March 23rd, the city of San Antonio issued shelter-in-place orders. San Antonio and our future butterfly abided, meeting needs for survival and safety by sheltering at home and in the chrysalis, respectively.
If you're in your home time and you're isolated, which is what we were telling people to do, we don't actually mean isolating in a sense. We should be going outside. If you're outside a safe distance, the likelihood you're going to transmit it is much less. So it's safer for the pandemic. It's also healthier for you physically, and it's also healthier for you mentally.
When the time arrives to become a butterfly, paper-thin chrysalis shell splits. The butterfly is extremely vulnerable at this stage. It hangs helpless, clinging only to the chrysalis shell, or perhaps a nearby twig or leaf. After a month as an egg, caterpillar, chrysalis, the moment arrives. The butterfly takes flight. After several days, the monarch searches for nectar by flowering plants, its primary need after its rebirth.
We are really deeply connected to the land around us and to the soil around us, and in times of fear, that's where we look.
Gardens are a magical place. Gardens are a magical part of our human history. And I think COVID has reintroduced people to gardening and understanding and caring for the things that are around their home, because the way our world was turned upside down.
Plants are essential in removing carbon dioxide from the air. Even more important, they pump carbon dioxide into the ground. That's what turns our soils brown or even black. It's the carbon that plant roots are putting into the ground. Some climate scientists or soil scientists have that the soils on planet Earth can sequester 7 times the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere right now. If we put plants back, we can start to pull some of that carbon out of the atmosphere.
Angiosperms, flowering plants, evolved alongside insects. It doesn't exist without the other. And that evolution occurred so that there was a payoff on both ends. And the payoff of the plant was the ability to reproduce. And that reproduction is what... It's fascinating about how ancient that connection is and how precarious it is.
Because San Antonio was also declared a creative city of gastronomy, we've tried to really incorporate the food angle of how does the food get on the plate, how does it get in the bottle. Insect pollinators, the essential workers of the ecosystem, make our food into possible. If it wasn't for insects, our food would be way more expensive or not even available.
At Farm Table, we try to approach healing people's bodies and healing the earth in like a multidisciplinary fashion, because it is all related. I think connecting to food is one of the most sacred things that you can do. And so we don't want food to be intimidating. We don't want it to be overwhelming. We want it to be welcoming. We want it to be comforting. We want it to be nurturing. So we're really excited about educating people about different honeys and about where their food comes from and the magic that really happens between pollinations and plants and the food that ends up on the plate. I think that having that kind of depth connection is what makes the Monarch so special, what makes this festival so special. It's more than just learning about this one insect. Insect is the doorway to all the other pollinators that are so important.
In late spring and into the summer, monarchs east of the Rocky Mountains arrive in their primary breeding grounds in the western United States. This is where the migrating monarch population is.
Danielle Bellamy is the co-founder of Black Birders Week. She's a birder fanatic, and her enthusiasm is contagious. Absolutely love spending time with her, and I'm so glad that she's here. Danielle, welcome.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here and talk to you. Every time I get to talk about birds, it just brings me so much joy that I am able to share my passion with you all. And I hope you are able to find either hobby, whatever it is, that brings you as much passion and as much happiness birds have been able to bring to me.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, get it.
On the 25th, Christian Cook, a black birder in Central Park, is harassed by a white woman and threatened with police intervention. The same day, George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, is murdered by Minneapolis police. Both incidents are documented and both are shared online, reigniting the Black Lives Matter movement.
We started Black Birders Week to raise awareness, but also celebrate the fact that Black outdoor enthusiasts, Black nature lovers are out and proud, and we're all over the place. We wanted to form a community because there's often a disconnect. We often don't see each other out in nature very often, so now we're able to at least form electronic communities and hopefully facilitate new nature lovers to come out and join us too. Since the pandemic has started, I've recentered my birding around just cemeteries, and not only are they just like a beautiful place architectural-wise, but also nature-wise. They're like these little urban oases oftentimes in areas that don't have a lot of green space. I'm trying to have those conversations to stigmatize. Cemeteries are not like a taboo place to be. Cemeteries are a really awesome place to be. Okay, it's like in this middle layer of it. Oh no, that's so cool.
the word is deceptive because I feel like it's really bird listening, and then you're looking for bird to hear it first.
Absolutely.
Bats provide incredible benefits to every day of our lives. Bats are incredible pollinators of many, many species of plants that are ecologically or economically important. We rely to maintain the genetic diversity that these plants need for the future, for their adaptation to climate change, to new pests, to new diseases, and bats are providing that service for free. There's a lot of myths and a lot of misinformation about bats and coronavirus. There's zero evidence that the virus came from bats. Bat virus cannot infect us. These bats are really resistant to many viruses. Their immune system is among the strongest immune systems on Earth. We need to be more like bats. We need to foster them, help them, protect them, and learn from them. Bats hold the key for hopeful futures for all humans all over the Earth.
The fourth and fifth generations of monarchs, sometimes called the super generation, are born in late summer and early fall. These monarchs head south when the weather and conditions in Canada and the northern United States no longer meet their needs. They stop for fuel along the way, building up their fat stores with sips of nectar.
This year, for the first time, we're doing an experiment with the University of Kansas Lawrence, and we are contributing to the field of knowledge about how monarchs are able to orient themselves, able to move south.
So what we're going to be doing outdoors in a natural environment where they're exposed to the sun and the wind, the temperature, so that they can get acclimated to being in San Antonio, and then after 5 days we'll be releasing them, and we're hoping that they can find their way south. And if our butterflies make it to Mexico and are recovered, I believe proven they have to acclimate, they can orient themselves in relation to the natural cues of the environment, then they can get there.
When you're doing the tagging, you want to first write down the tagging number, and that's how they will record that specific butterfly. You want to check to see if it's male or female, which is really simple. There's 2 black dots on the wings. Male. You pick up a monarch butterfly at the base of its wings behind its head, and you hold it gently but firmly. There's a very specific part of the wing called the discal cell. You apply the sticker. It has a non-toxic adhesive to it, so it won't hurt the butterfly. And then you release the butterfly.
This is what really hooked me on monarch butterflies, because when you have a tactile experience with the creature, you touch it, you put this little sticker on it and release it to the wind, it changes you.
Hopefully anytime people see butterflies or they see one passing by in their own yard, it will inspire them to either create more habitat in their own spaces from their own yard, maybe their work office. So it'll be a good memory, and it'll be a tie-in that they'll want to educate, and they'll want to bring it into their own yards and their own spaces as well.
There are so many insects we haven't even documented or named species names for, and they're just going away because of a combination of climate change, habitat destruction, pesticides. So it's not just any one thing, it's sort of a perfect storm of destruction for insect species, and it's a great cause of concern in the science community.
The Mayor's Monarch Pledge to me means that we're going to reach those 24 goals of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge to educate others about the importance of pollinators and monarchs in particular to our environment and our ecosystem, and the connectivity between that little insect and us and thriving civilization.
Roosts and group travel become more common as the monarchs migrate south, congregating in the Texas funnel in October, late in the migration season.
The migration of the monarch really has been a conversation amongst the indigenous or native communities that I've surrounded myself with for a long time. We've always migrated before borders existed. So we will continue to migrate the same way that the butterflies continue to migrate. As a migrant community, I think we live in the chrysalis. We live in the shadows. We live in fear because of the way we're criminalized. So then we're not able to really transition into this beautiful butterfly that we can.
People can't gather and mourn, or they can't see their loved ones right now. I think the project's beneficial just because we're able to reconnect. We're able to reconnect lost stories, or able to reconnect to people who we recently lost, maybe want to hold that memory alive.
Those outings are such important spaces for them to feel remembered because they don't leave us, right? They return their body back to the earth, but their spirits are always around us. And so I believe that, they're always around, and they do feel that we are remembering them, and putting that prayer candle there by the picture means everything.
My family has had more than 30 members of our family on both sides of the family here in San Antonio with 19 at one point or another. 16 of them were at the hospital at one point or another, and then 6 of them, unfortunately, my cousins, have passed away, and they all had underlying health conditions. Health conditions resulted from the social determinants of health. Unfortunately, it took something like this for the community to really rally together and see what it is that we can do so that the next time that something hits us like COVID-19, we won't lose any community members.
So this year, tagging the monarch is different. Traditionally, when you tag the butterfly, you would write your name or the name of the person who is doing the tagging. And this year, we will write the name of a person who has passed away recently in order to honor their lives.
Abuelito Seferino,
George Floyd,
Eduardo Yasaki,
Doris Wallace,
Breonna Taylor,
Luis Angel Guerra, Marcos Cervantes,
Ricardo Yasaki,
Katie Bell, Michael Bell,
Lance Rodriguez,
Dario Guerra, Abuelito Aquilino.
Each year, tens of millions of monarch butterflies journey nearly 3,000 miles to find their way to the same patch of forest of their ancestors in the mountains west of Mexico City. Their arrival coincides with the Mexican celebration of Dia de los Muertos on November 1st and 2nd.
It's pretty incredible, and it makes you stop and think about the magic of nature, how the monarchs keep flying. They don't let hurricanes, wildfires, pests stop. They just keep on trucking, and that's what we have to do too.
I think it's really important to try to draw the next generation into some of the, honestly, things I'm still learning. It's all about the perspective shift, right? Because I'm not trying to tell them what to believe, what to do, what the relationship with land is going to be, just that they should have one.
It's each one of us who has the power to improve the ecological integrity of the little piece of the earth that we occupy. Each one of us can make a difference by planting the powerful plants that support nature, putting pollen in your garden, shrinking your lawn. And if we do it throughout the world, that truly will be nature's best hope.
In this moment of so much loss and turmoil, it's important to look around us in our environment and really observe what nature is telling us.
Everybody should go out and vote because it is your opportunity to voice your opinion. Help appoint leaders that you think best represent you.
Education is the key to change. Without having information and without having firsthand experiences, nothing to connect us to the future or to give the future any kind of value. So I think that's why it's really important to provide these experiences, to provide these opportunities to learn and to grow.
This year has been one of incredible change, and that can be a really good thing. The question is, what kind of change? That's the choice that people have to make this year.
ready.
Cool. All right, everybody, we're going to get started. I want to give a couple of quick thank yous. First to Legacy Park for letting us be here and hold this event. The River Authority, thank you, Legacy Park. The River Authority for donating all their time and energy to plants for us to learn about how to create a rainbow gardens. Thank you for donating the plants. The Sanitary Report, who's our media sponsor. Compost Queens for donating soil for the planting activity. Flying Whippet for handling all of our crazy media. Pinkerton's Barbecue for being out here wherever they are and providing drinks. PR for bringing some of my favorite bands for after this. Thank you. And next I'm going to introduce Monica Mackley. So Monica is my mentor and friend. So she's the founder of the festival and has really put so much time and energy into making all of this happen since 2015. Thank you, Monica. And here you go.
Thank you, Ashley. Thanks all of you for coming out tonight. You are in for an incredible discussion and conversation with Katherine Hayhoe. Tonight actually marked Katherine's second appearance at the festival. She was kind enough to join us in 2016 at our very first festival when nobody knew what we were doing, and she joined us on our climate change panel, and so we're delighted to have her. And it turns out that when she was a child in Canada, she tagged monarch butterflies, so it was meant to be. Let me just take another minute to thank some of our amazing sponsors. I really extend special thanks to Valero Energy, the John and Florence Newman Foundation. Check out those grackles. The Winkler Family Foundation of Austin. Without the support of these organizations, we would not be here tonight. And also like to extend a very special appreciation to our really good friends at the San Antonio River Foundation, because they stepped up big time last year when we lost our venue, and we are now going to have our festival a week from Saturday at Confluence Park. It's free, October 16th, 10 to 2. We hope you'll all come out and join us. It will be a wonderful day of family-friendly events. We'll be tagging hundreds of monarch butterflies. If you want to learn about how we do that, come on down and join us. As I said, it's free. So check it all out at texasbutterflyranch.com. So now let's get on with our show. The reason I came tonight. So Katherine Hayhoe, born in Canada, she lives in Lubbock, and she is the director of Texas Tech University Climate Science Center. She's also the chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy. Hayhoe has been called one of the most effective communicators on climate change, and you're about to hear why. Her book, Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing, we actually have another signed copy to raffle off later. In a Divided World is written with equal compassion and science. It serves as a tutorial to navigate skeptics and deniers and encourages readers with hope found in our common human bonds. What a refreshing and much needed take. Brendan Gibbons here, senior reporter for the San Antonio Report, will lead the conversation. Gibbons primarily covers the environment. He also does this super popular Trailist series, which is a local guide hiking, biking, and paddling trails. So please, ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to Brendan Gibbons and Katherine Hayhoe.
Thank you so much, Monica. Really nice introduction. Thank you so much for being out here on Thursday. I really appreciate you giving some of your time to us today. I've never been to Legacy Park here before. This is a beautiful spot, and I love that little grassy field. While we're waiting for Katherine to get connected, would you guys indulge me a little bit with something that's straight out of her book? She does a test when she's meeting new people sometimes to gauge how much they care about climate change, to gauge their feelings on it. I would really love it if I could ask you guys to raise your hand on a scale of 1 to 10. Because climate change is not an issue. You don't really care about it at all. It's the most serious issue. You wake up, you think about it, you're going to bed thinking about it. 5 is, there's somewhat of a serious issue, but it's not other more important ones. Let's start with 1. Who's a 1? Raise your hand. Again, 1 you don't care about. 2. 3. 4. Got some 4. How about a 5? 6. 7, 9, 10. We have a lot of people here who care about climate change quite a bit. So thank you so much for being here. You hear us okay? Almost. We're working on it a little. Well,
hello.
Hi. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you virtually and in giant size, too.
Yeah, you're blown up. So thank you so much for being here today. Can you see me? Okay, can you see them? The backs of them, maybe?
Yes. I can see the backs of all of your heads, and I can see you, too.
That's great. We just took them through the scale of 1 to 10. How much do you care about climate change? Question. And we had some 4s. We had a 1, 5s, handful of 6s, but mostly 9s and 10s. So I think that tells you about what kind of group you're speaking with today. People who are already engaged and care a lot about this issue, and it's one of the perfect readers of your book, right?
That's right. I didn't write the book for people who aren't worried. I wrote the book for people who are. And today, 70% of us are already worried about climate change. 70%, even right here in Texas. But 50% of us don't know what to do. 50% of us feel helpless about the issue.
How would you talk about these in the language of these sort of 6 different stances on climate, from alarm to dismissive? Do you mind kind of defining some of those right now?
Not at all. So on contentious issues like climate change, and climate change is one of the most politically polarized issues in the whole country, and it's been that way for over a decade, we tend to divide people into 2 groups, us and them, right? And when it comes to climate change, we tend to put labels on those 2 groups, believers and deniers. I don't like either of those labels. I don't like the label believer because climate change is not a religion. You don't need to believe in thermometers to understand that they give you a number. It is real, it is serious, and science has been clear on that for well over 50 years. The 2 physicists who just won the Nobel Prize just last week for climate modeling, when they were doing their work, the 1950s and the 1960s. That's how long scientists have been warning people about the change. I don't like the word denier either, though. Why? Because that's a word that immediately draws a line in the sand. It says, you deny things that are manifest to everyone else. There must be something wrong with you. And all too often, people who have questions, and frankly, who would not have questions these days with all the step information we have in the media? Absolutely. People who have questions get slapped with a denier label right away, and it shuts down the conversation. So what I prefer is something called the 6 Americas of Global Warming. It's a tool that divides people up into 6 different groups. And I wonder if I could actually show it to you. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Since I'm giant, I might as well take advantage of the screen, right?
That would be great.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. You have to make me, whoever's running the Zoom has to make me a co-host, and I can share my screen. So if you can hear me and you're able to do that, go ahead and make me a co-host, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'll keep talking about it while you're doing that. So rather than being just us and them, we follow along the spectrum. Where on one hand, we have people who are alarmed, concerned. That's 55% of us are alarmed or concerned. When you add in the cautious, that's 75% of us. 75% are alarmed, concerned, or cautious. And if you think that describes you, then you're exactly who I wrote my book for. Then there's a tiny number, 6%, who are disengaged. They've been living under a rock for the last 20 years, and some of us have been. And then 12% are seriously doubtful, but only 7% are dismissive. Who are dismissive? Oh, here I go. I can share now.
All right.
Ready? Okay. Who are the dismissives? Dismissives are people who dismiss anything. They'll dismiss 200 years of science, 2,000 climate scientists, 2 million scientific results. I'm sorry, I'm getting wicked feedback here all of a sudden. And people who are dismissive, it is part of their identity. They can't let it go. Bring it up any chance they have. So chances are you might dream of having a positive, constructive conversation with the dismissive person in your life. We all have someone in our family or a colleague, a coworker, or a neighbor. They're the only people we can't, because they can't even listen to what we're saying. That's how intensely they fear the information that we have. But you know what? 92% of us are not dismissive. And so with 92% of us, we absolutely can have positive, constructive conversations about why climate change matters. I'll show you a really fun thing. Do you know that there is a little tool online, and if you Google sassy, I know that's a very Texas word, isn't it? If you Google sassy, and you Google Yale, and you Google climate, you will see this, the 6 America's Short Survey, or SASSY. It just asks you a couple of different questions. You can even take the quiz. You can take the quiz and you can find out, are you alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, or dismissive? Isn't that fun?
So how do you identify if you're speaking to dismissive, somebody who's cautious, somebody who's doubtful and able to be persuaded? And I think this comes up for you quite a bit because you give dozens, maybe hundreds of talks a year to all kinds of different audiences. And you live in Lubbock. Lubbock is an extremely conservative city with a strong oil, gas, and agricultural presence. And, you know, I imagine you tell stories in the book that you encounter the dismissive attitude quite a bit, but then also people who are more open. So how do you know who you're dealing with when you have these talks?
That's a very good question. So through trial and error, through thousands of conversations I've had with people, I've learned to be able to recognize who's dismissive. Here's how I recognize them. On social media, where they're disproportionately represented on Twitter and LinkedIn, if anybody's wondering, not on Instagram. On Instagram, people are very, very friendly, but on Twitter and LinkedIn, there's a lot of dismissives. They will come at you with some type of objection, and if you say, no, that's not true, here's a link where you can learn more, they can't click. They literally physically cannot click. Some of them will pretend they did. Some of them will ignore it. Some of them will refuse to do it or ridicule it and be like, oh, can't you explain it? Why do you have to give me a link? But if they can't click, it is a classic sign that they are dismissive. How do we see this in real life? Dismissive cannot listen to anything we say. I'll give you an example. I just gave a talk the other day at local here in Lubbock, and I know there would be a lot of cautious people there, a lot of doubtful people there. So I answered all the commonly asked questions people have, like, how do we know it's not volcanoes? And I said in my talk, very short talk, only 15 minutes, I said, you may have heard people say that one volcanic eruption produces more pollution than all humans, so why are we worried about what we're doing? But that isn't true. Volcanic eruptions actually cool the earth rather than warming it. And even though geologic activity, not volcanoes, you know, the gases that you smell when you go to Yellowstone and things like that, geologic activity produces a little bit of heat-trapping gases, but it's only equivalent to about what 3 medium-sized U.S. states produce, nowhere near what Texas does. So said at the end, somebody came up to me and he said, first of all, he used a false expert approach. He said, I have a book that was written by someone to work at NASA that says it is true. And I said, well, you could have a book by anyone you want. I'm getting bad feedback here again, sorry. But just about every climate scientist in the world agrees it's real, it's serious. And then he said this, he said, well, you talk about volcanoes. Don't you know that one volcanic eruption, I'm not kidding, this, one volcanic eruption is responsible for pollution that all humans put together? I said, I literally said that in my presentation. He said, I didn't hear. They cannot hear what we're saying. And so that's why conversations aren't constructive. But with people who are doubtful, they will hear what we're saying. They might come back with more questions, but they actually process what we said. People who are cautious are the most misunderstood. They lead with their doubts and their questions because then who wouldn't? The misinformation we hear online. So when people ask questions, they don't immediately assume they're dismissive. Rather, as I talk about in the book, answer the question briefly, but then pivot immediately to why it matters to us where we live and what we're doing to fix it. And if you're in San Antonio, You have a lot of examples of what the city is doing to you can talk about.
That's absolutely true. I think one that I read about recently was that San Antonio is taking waste methane from one of the local landfills, a private landfill. It's putting it into the natural gas supply network, offsetting the demand for natural gas for buses. And this is enough to account for, I think, up to 3/4 of the metropolitan transit bus fleet. So, offsetting that much methane coming out of the ground and using waste gas product, it's a pretty big deal. I'm kind of proud of San Antonio for that.
You should be.
There's a great story in your book of when you speak to a Rotary Club there in Lubbock about climate science, and you don't lead with the facts. You don't lead with an avalanche of information. What happened instead?
When I started talking about climate change, I led with the facts because that's all I knew. I just gave more and more and more facts and facts and facts. But then I listened very carefully to the questions people had, and I soon realized that they weren't about the science or the facts. They were about why does this matter, and how are we supposed to, what am I supposed to do about this global problem? So a few years ago, I was asked to speak at our local Rotary for the first time, and I'm not a Rotarian. So I didn't know what the Rotary Club was for, but I did know that they were local. So I figured I would start with what we had in common, because as I always begin a conversation with what we have in common, something we can agree on. So I think I talk about how our weather here in Texas is just absolutely wild. In fact, if you think you have it bad in San Antonio, Lubbock, Texas won the Weather Channel's competition for the wildest weather in the whole United States. We beat Fairbanks, Alaska, and Fargo, North Dakota. But even though our weather is so extreme, it is getting even more extreme. We know that our heat waves are getting stronger, our droughts are getting longer, our heavy downpours are getting more frequent. So I plan to start by talking about our shared sense of place. But as I walked into the lobby, I saw this giant 4-foot banner. This is a big screen. This is probably 4 feet, right? I saw this giant 4-foot banner that had Rotarians' 4-way text on it. Is it true? Is it fair? Is it beneficial to all concerned? Would it build goodwill and better friendships? I looked at this list and I thought to myself, that's climate change. Is it true? Yes. Is it fair? Absolutely not. The 3.5 billion poorest people in the world, they've contributed 7% of the heat-trapping gas emissions, yet they're bearing the brunt of the impacts. Would it be beneficial to do something about it? For sure. Climate solutions are good for us now as well as in the future. Let me just give you one example. Did you know that burning fossil fuels, coal and gas and oil, produce not just heat-trapping gases, but air pollution? That's that stuff you can see in the air on a smoggy day over the city. Air pollution from fossil fuels is responsible for almost 9 million premature deaths every year. To put that in context, so far we've seen 4.5 million premature deaths from COVID. That's a little more, 4.8 I think we're at now. Don't get me wrong, every premature death is a tragedy. I know people who lost their lives to COVID, and you probably do too. This is at the top of our awareness. We understand that people are dying from COVID. But did you know that almost double that number die every single year because of air pollution? We don't know these things. And so from that perspective alone, it makes a lot of sense to look at getting our energy from different ways. And here in Texas, we know how to get energy all kinds of ways. We have more wind energy than any other state in the country. When I moved to Texas 15 years ago, we were not even in the top 10 for solar producing. Guess what? We're number 2 this year, and we are heading up. California better watch out. We're building the biggest solar farm in the whole U.S. just outside of Dallas. So it's good for the economy. It's good for jobs. It's good for our energy. And, oh yes, it's also good for climate. All of these things truly are good for us.
I wonder if you could tell people more about why you care. Scientists love solving problems. They love, mastering an intellectual challenge. They love finding a really tricky question. But that's kind of not what I'm hearing from you about why this matters to you or why you have strong feelings about it. So tell me about who you are and why you care.
Scientists do love understanding tricky problems. And I love that as much as anyone. So that's why I'm planning to be an astrophysicist. There's always something new to discover in the universe. And I was well on my way. I was finishing my undergraduate degree. I'd already published a couple of research studies on galaxy clusters and quasars. And I needed an extra class to finish my degree. I looked around and there was a brand new class on climate science. I thought, well, that looks interesting. Why not take it? And I had learned about climate change before. I had learned about it along with other environmental issues. So biodiversity loss, deforestation, air pollution, climate change. I thought of these as environmental issues that environmentalists work on. The rest of us wish them well. That's the way I thought about climate change. I took the class though, and I was completely shocked to learn, first of all, climate change is no longer a future issue. It's here and now. And we are seeing that in spades in Texas. Right here in Texas, we're seeing our extreme heat is more frequent. Our heavy downpours are happening more often. Some places in Houston, they've had 3 500-year flood events in 3 years. That is not normal. We're seeing our hurricanes are intensifying faster and dumping a lot more rain than they used to. Our droughts are longer and stronger. Sea level is rising. The changes are already here today. We can see this happening. But that wasn't what changed my life. What changed my life was when I learned that climate change is an everything issue. Climate change affects our health. It affects the food we eat, the air we breathe, and the water we drink. It affects the economy and national security. But most of all, it disproportionately affects the poorest and most marginalized people here in Texas, as well as on the other side of the world, and that is not fair. We see that with our winter storm that we had last February. Remember that? If you're in Texas, you definitely remember it. What does that have to do with climate change? It was a winter storm. Well, it turns out that because the Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet, it is massively messing up our weather patterns. When the Arctic warms, it destabilizes the polar vortex and it causes it to stretch. And then it causes it jet wave or the jet stream to start waving, and it waves all the way to guess where? Texas. So the fact that that freezer door of the Arctic is swinging open and cold air from the Arctic, which for the Arctic is not that cold, but in Texas it's very cold. All that cold air from the Arctic is pouring out that freezer door all the way down to Texas. Why? Because the Arctic is warming so much that that freezer door is swinging open. So along comes this crazy winter storm, which was made more likely because of a warm Arctic. We've had these storms before too, don't get me wrong. And what happens? We lose our power. Well, what happens if you live in a home that's, a rental home or a mobile home? It's not insulated, it might have broken windows, you can't afford a generator. You're the one who's suffering the most. You can't afford to go somewhere else with somebody else who has heat or electricity. And guess what? Your neighborhood was one of the last ones to get power back on too. Climate change disproportionately affects the very people who've contributed the least to it, who are already marginalized, already disadvantaged, already coping with so many different issues. That's not fair. For me, as a Christian, that hit me in the heart, not the head, but the heart. And the reason I became a climate scientist is, again, not because of what's up here, but because of what's here. I truly believe that if we take the Bible seriously, that we're called to love others. And what is less loving than to put our hands over our ears and eyes, so to speak, and say, oh, it's not real, it doesn't matter, when it really is affecting real people today. So that's why I care. But I also care because I'm a mom, and I would do anything to make my child has a better future. I care because I live right here in Texas, and we are the #1 most vulnerable state in the whole country to climate impacts. But we also have the most potential for clean energy too. I care about it because I'm from Texas, and I love snow. And the warmer it gets, the less snow we have. I know that might sound kind of odd to you, but I truly do love snow. Because I am, that's why I care. And so I would challenge you right now, take inventory of who you are. Who are you? What do you care about? And how does that connect to climate change?
You talk a lot about your faith in the book, and I grew up evangelical Christian as well, and many of my family still believe. And when I talk to them about this issue, I find most often the response is, "It's in God's hands. He's in control." You know, it's arrogant for man to assume he could influence something as big as the planet. How do you see that argument?
That is the number one most frequent religious-y sounding argument I hear. I don't say religious-y to be cute about it. I say it because if you actually go to the Bible, it's not there. Those arguments sound pious. They might sound Christian. They certainly sound very religious. Why? Well, if you go to the Bible, this is chapter 1. It says God gave humans responsibility over every living thing on this planet. And all through the New Testament, it talks about how we are to be recognized for our love for others, which includes caring for the needy, the poor, the downtrodden, disadvantaged, the very people who are most affected by climate change today. And then what does it say at the end of the Bible? It says God will destroy those who destroy the earth. So the whole idea that, oh, God's in control, so we humans can't affect it, it sounds spiritual. It sounds pious. It sounds religious, and it might even sound Christian. Until when? Until you read what the Bible actually says. So I have a little YouTube series called Global Weirding. Not warming, weird. Because that's what we see happening, right? Things are just getting weird. And this YouTube series that I did with our local PBS station, KTTZ, we answer all kinds of frequently asked questions that people have, like, it's just warmed by a few degrees, what's the big deal? And how do we know the natural cycle? And I'm one person, what am I supposed to do about it? And don't developing countries need fossil fuels like we used? So we answer all these questions, but I said, let's just do an episode on what does the Bible say about climate change? Because I get so many religiously sounding objections, which also include, well, the world's going to end anyways, who cares? And God would never again flood the earth. And I said, just, a little episode that talks about that. And so we did. And you know what? It is our second most watched episode. In fact, I'm going to show you that since I can share my screen. I have the giant screen. I don't want to waste it. Right? So Global Weirding on YouTube is what it's called, and you can subscribe to it. We have a new season coming out next month. So if you push subscribe, you will hear about that. Let me share the screen with you right now so you can see it. Here we go. Okay. Global Weirding. And if you look at our most popular episodes, the second most popular one, the Bible doesn't talk about climate change, right? And the first one is, I'm only a kid, so I can't do anything, can I? Of course, the answer is kids are amazing and they're doing so much. And then I love this one. If I explain the facts, surely people get it, right? No, because it's not the facts. It's about we don't think it matters and we don't think anything we can do to fix it. So that's why talking about it is so important, and not dumping a ton of facts on people, but basically saying, look, if you take the Bible seriously, then here's why you would care about climate change. If you live in Texas, here's why you would care about climate change. If you have military experience, here's why you would care about climate change. The military calls climate change a threat multiplier. And guess what? Fort Hood, biggest army base by land in the US, it is 43% by clean energy, saving taxpayers millions of dollars because that's a cheaper source of energy than natural gas. So whoever we are, whether we're a parent, whether we're a student, whether we love to kayak on the river, and we love our natural springs we have here in Texas, even if we love to hunt, if we love to bird, no matter who we are, climate change affects us. Because of who we are, that's why we care.
A lot of the book goes into what we do about it, and you tell us that the most important thing we can do is talk about it. You also speak a lot about your grappling with daily climate ethics that I think all of us have to deal with, care about this issue, and it just leads to these moments, I think for me, of kind of like standing in the grocery store looking at all the different eggs in the egg aisle and deciding which is the most sustainable that I can buy, which can I afford the best, and kind of agonizing over these daily decisions. Maybe one of the reasons you're joining us on this giant screen right now is because you limit your specifically to work on your carbon footprint in that way. So how do you navigate this like difficult challenge, and can you put it in the right context too? Like how much we do as individuals?
So often I'm asked, is it about individual personal lifestyle choices, or is it about system-wide change? And my answer to the question is yes, because a system is made up of people. Why do you think a major corporation decided to set a net zero goal and transition all their energy sources to clean energy and decarbonize the supply chain? Was it because the CEO rolled out of bed one morning and got hit with the brainwave that they should do it? No, I can guarantee you that's not what happened. What happened was individual people within that company started saying, hey, why are we producing so much carbon? We have the ability to change. We could set a goal. We could transition to clean energy. We could be more efficient. We could lead in talking to other people in our industry and our supply chain about taking action too. They used their voices. And eventually the momentum built up with enough people using their voices that it got to the CEO and it got to the board, and they made that decision. Why do you think that churches are divesting from fossil fuels? It isn't because the person in charge, the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Bishop of the Episcopal Church or the head of the General Assembly of whatever denomination, because they just, rolled in bed one day with a brainwave, let's do it. No, it was because individual people in individual churches have been talking about it, sharing it, and building momentum to the point where I just that the Presbyterian Church of Ireland just voted to divest from fossil fuels. And in the General Assembly, the speech that was given before they voted actually quoted from my book, Saving Us. And it talked about how I talk about how as a Christian I care because it was profoundly unfair. And you don't have to be a Christian. You just have to be a human to care for that reason, right? Because we're all humans living on this planet. And what we have in common is far more than what divides us. So having these conversations is so important, but connecting the dots, what we can do is essential. Where do personal lifestyle come in? Well, I'm a scientist. So I have calculated the actual impact if all people who were alarmed and concerned about climate change did everything they could right now with the system that they live to cut their carbon footprint. How much percent of emissions do you think we could cut that way? Take a guess to yourself, and I will tell you the answer. Less than 20%. A bit less than 20%. So
that's choosing what to eat, what to drive, how often to travel, how often to fly, all the things we recognize about 20%. Wow.
Solar panels, plug-in car, public transportation, complete change to our diet, swap out our bulbs, insulate our house, the works, 20%. So then you might
Question, really quick. What happened in 2020 when economic activity all over the world stopped? When we were all driving less, when factories weren't producing as much, what happened to carbon emissions?
Yes, great question. So flights shut down, people stopped traveling, people stopped driving, factories shut down. How much did carbon emissions drop around the whole world? 7%.
That's a bit of a frustrating statistic because the whole world changed and emissions dropped 7%. That's a little rough.
Yes, I think the size of my giant eyeballs. I find that to be very rough. Yes, so that's my point. That is exactly my point. If we think it's all up to us, in our highly individualistic society where we are conditioned and trained from an early age to think it's all about the individual, right? Not the collective. We're never going to fix the problem. So then you might say, and I know people are thinking this, so does she mean that nothing matters? So we should just eat, drink, be merry, drive that Hummer, eat a giant steak every day because it doesn't matter. No, that's not what I'm saying either. Why not? Well, first of all, you want to live according to your values. I do. Why? Because it makes me feel better. I like having solar panels. It makes me happy. Not only that, it makes me feel a sense of, if I do something, can it make a difference? It's not a difference to the world, but it is to me. And you know what? It's going to make a bigger difference than just me. Why? Because change is contagious. So they show, I talk about in the book, that the number one predictor whether somebody will have solar panels on their house is if someone else within a mile of their house has them. It's called clustering. And they also found access. We don't have enough early adopters to have significant clusters yet. So I decided to be one. And sure enough, after we put up our solar panels, some showed up block. And then 2 people I know got them and put them on their roof too. And now business in the church, they're talking about doing it too. What was the impact? It wasn't just my carbon that was being cut. It was seeing them, it was talking about them. And then it was me thinking, hey, where does my university get its energy from? Are we looking at solar and wind? We have a National Wind Energy Institute at our university. So that's conversations with people at our university who make decisions saying, have you considered that maybe we should all be getting our power this way? After all, we live in Texas, don't we? And we certainly have more wind than we know what to do with. Using our voice is the number one thing we can do. But we can use our voice to talk about what we're doing. We can use it to talk about what our city is doing. We can use our voice to talk about what our school or our place of work is doing. And we can absolutely use our voice to tell our elected representatives, not just federal, but what we need to do. And now's a particularly good time to do that. There's a budget coming up, and you think the budget is born with nothing to do with climate change, and you could not be more wrong. Embedded in that budget bill is the most serious piece of climate legislation we're going to see in the next decade. So now is a great time to use your voice to all your elected representatives, but talk to city people too. Because cities like San Antonio can do so much, and they already have done so much. Talk about it where you work. Talk about it, whatever organization you're part of, the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club. Talk about it with the people that you go walking with, or you go kayaking with, or you go hiking with, or fishing with, or hunting with. Talk about it at your church if you go to one. Talk about it wherever we are, because the world has changed before. In the last 200 years, the world has changed in profound ways. Slavery, women's rights, civil rights, gay rights. The world has changed in incredible ways. How did it change? It was never because the president decided it had to. It was always because very ordinary people, not even rich or famous people, very ordinary people decided the world could and it must change. And they used their voices to advocate for that change at every level.
People who might feel a bit intimidated going into any of these conversations with somebody who doesn't care as much as somebody here might. What are some of those zombie arguments that tend to come up to deny climate science? And I wonder if you could tell us, why do climate scientists really know what you know about the planet? One of the things I hear most often, I heard tonight, was the planet's changed before. Our global temperature has changed quite a bit. How do we know less this time? It's clearly warming, but is it human activity?
That's one of my favorite questions, because I'm like, how do you know the planet's been warmer before? It's because Earth scientists found out and told you. And we're the same Earth scientists who are telling you that climate is changing today because of humans. But I digress. Let me just emphasize a point that I mentioned before, but it's really important to mention again. Only 7% are dismissive, and then 12% are doubtful. People who are cautious might lead with their, but we can have good conversations there, because chances are they're probably a little bit worried too. Remember, 70% of us are already worried about it, but we're not talking about it. Only 14% of us are talking about it. So often I think, well, I need to have a conversation with the toughest nut I can crack. But in reality, we need to be having conversations with everyone. People who we might think exactly the same way we do. They might, but they're not talking about it, and they don't know what to do about it. So have a conversation about what you could do together. Having conversations with the silent majority is so essential. And don't just sort of walk and say, so climate change, big downer. Do you want to talk about it? No. Just while you're having conversations about things that matter to you, you could be talking about beer or wine. You could be talking about what you're going to be doing over the weekend. You're going to be talking about how you were thinking about California, but wildfires are just too crazy. Whatever it is that you're talking about, you can connect dots to climate change and then bring in positive solutions. It could be something you're doing in your life. It could be something somebody else is doing that you're thinking about trying. It could be something you know that a company or a city or a church or a bigger organization is doing that you could offer. Hey, did you know that they did this? This was amazing. That giant boulder boulder of climate action, it's not stuck at the bottom of the cliff. It's already at the top of the hill, rolling down the hill in the right direction, and it's got millions of hands on it. People have science-sounding questions, though. I have a chapter in my book, and I have global weirding episodes to tackle those. So if you like watching YouTube videos, or if you want to read the book or listen to the book, it's an audio book too, you will get the answers to frequently asked objections, the sciencey sounding objections. Remember about how there's religiously sounding objections? There's also sciencey sounding ones. Why do I say sciencey? Because when we look at them, we see that they, similar to the religiously ones, they don't have a scientific leg to stand on. But they're good questions because they make sense logically. How do we know it's not a natural cycle? The answer is because these scientists have checked. We're the ones who understand what natural cycles are. Most people don't realize that natural cycles like El Nino are very specific in how they work. Namely, they simply move heat back and forth between the ocean, the atmosphere, and back again. From east to west and back again. From north to south and back again. So natural cycles don't create heat out of nothing. That would violate conservation of energy. All they do is move that heat around. So in the past, natural cycle created something called the medieval warm period, when it was warmer than average over the North Atlantic, and that's when Vikings sailed in Newfoundland. And there still remains of Viking settlements in Newfoundland today. They got there during the medieval warm period. But because it was a natural cycle, that means that heat had to come from somewhere. And if you lived over in Siberia at the same time, it was not the medieval warm period, it was the medieval cold period. That's right. It was warm in one place and it was cold in another. When we look around the whole world, we see the whole atmosphere warm, all of it. It's a natural cycle. That heat has to be coming from somewhere, and there's only one place it could be coming from, and that's the ocean. There's a tiny, tiny little bit of heat leaking up from the earth. I mean, it's like this big. And this is a giant screen. So I'm going to put my nails together so you see it's not big, tiny. So we look at the ocean. If the ocean heat content is going down, but the atmosphere heat content is going up, then it's a natural cycle. So we look at the ocean. What do we see? The ocean heat content is going up 20 times more than the atmosphere, land surface, and all the ice, the cryosphere put together. There is no way this is a natural cycle. The entire planet is warming. And we've also looked at the sun. We've looked at volcanoes. We've looked at orbital cycles and the ice age. According to the orbital cycles, we should be heading into another ice age in about 2,000 years, not getting warmer. We've looked at all of those. And in fact, there's an amazing website that I'm going to show you since I can share my screen. I love sharing my screen now because you can see all these resources. There's a great website called skepticalscience.com. You can Google it, skepticalscience.com. They have a list of the 100 and, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom here super quick, 198 most common sciencey sounding objections to climate change. They have a short answer, but if you click on it, they have a longer answer, and they even have an even longer answer with all the scientific data explaining how we know it's not the sun, it's not natural cycles, it's not orbital cycles, it really is us. Why are we so sure it's us? I mean, did scientists just come up with that science recently, like after Al Gore's movie or something? No. You know when we discovered digging up coal and oil and gas produces heat trapping gases, building up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around our planet, causing it to warm? We discovered that in the 1850s.
What a strange
difference. Known for almost 200 years. Not only that it's real, that it's us. And that's why we are so sure about it. But I want to, before we go on, Brendan, I want to tell you one more interesting thing. You know the website I just showed you?
Oh, I hope you're going to talk about his father and the guy who created it. Maybe we can talk about that in a second. Go
That's
ahead.
exactly where I'm going.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So, this website was created by a man named John Cook. John has a dad. And his dad, every time home for dinner would be like, well, John, I heard it's all sunspots. And John would be like, no, it's not. And the next day he'd be like, well, it's volcanoes. Those scientists are just made up. So John not only creates skeptical science, which is the most comprehensive set of responses to science arguments in the world, he goes back to university and he gets a PhD in cognitive psychology. He becomes a global expert in misinformation. An amazing YouTube channel, Cranky Uncle, where he talks about COVID misinformation and climate misinformation. Google Cranky Uncle. Do you think that changed his dad's mind? Then you know the answer. Tell us.
It did not. His father was very skeptical, and something eventually did. Maybe you can talk about that.
Something did change his mind. It wasn't all the facts that John was offering, even though they were great facts. What changed his dad's mind was that in the rural area of Australia where he lived, he offered a rebate on solar panels. Now, his dad is a fiscal conservative who likes saving money and likes, sound familiar? Most people in Texas would agree with that too, right? So he crunched the numbers and he saw how much money he was going to save. And he said, wow, I should get these solar panels. So he did. And he started to save so much money that every month he started to send John his power bill saying how much money I saved. So it turns out 99.9% of our objections to climate change have nothing to do with the science and everything to do with solution aversion. We don't think that we can fix it. Dad discovered that he was part of the solution. He had solar panels. And so you know what happened? About a year later, he was talking to John, and he said in the course of conversation, oh, global warming, I've always thought it was real. Have you seen my list? And John said he almost fell off his chair because not only had his dad changed his mind, he had forgotten that he had ever denied it. Why? Because what he was doing was offering himself solar panels, offering him the chance to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And when he realized he could be part of the solution, he changed his mind. That is the power of our personal lifestyle choices. They change us and they change other people too. Isn't that amazing?
They even change our memories of our own selves and what the story that we tell about ourselves. That story made me feel much better about my own failed conversations with people about this stuff, and especially with family, because your family knows everything about you. And all, if I try to talk to a climate science denying relative about, about some of the stuff they know about everything else I've been wrong in my entire life. So it's easier to start with somebody who's not a relative sometimes.
I think so. I think it is. But we are, us as individuals, we are the best messengers to people we know, more effective than scientists. Because in the same way, we have a hobby in common, or a place of work in common, or a background in common. But not the dismissives. Don't start with the dismissives. Start with people who you might think they think the same as me, so why should we talk about it? Well, you know what? You're not talking about it. Chances are nobody's doing anything about it. So have a conversation again with that silent majority and say, are you worried? I'm worried too. What do you think we should do? Do you know anything that people are doing? Let's talk about what we might be able to do together. Maybe we could find a group that we could join a community organization. There are all kinds of organizations that are place-based, that are sport-based, that are faith-based, special interest-based. Maybe we could join more people and find more people to join. We could do something together. Have that conversation. Doesn't matter who you're talking to, even if you think we might totally agree with each other, we still aren't talking about it, and most of us feel hopeless and helpless when we're confronted with this issue. And where do we find hope? We find hope when we act. When we act, hope is all around us.
I have a couple questions that I've just been pondering about climate science and how it intersects with Christianity. Pollution sin is choosing to, if I choose to fly when I could drive, if I choose to eat meat when I could choose a different thing, is that a sinful choice because it proportionally affects the poor?
So in the book, I'm sure you're referring to this, I tell the story of how I was at a meeting with other Christians, Protestants, Catholic, talking about how can we reach the church on this issue. And after a few hours of discussing, one man had enough, and he just thumped his hand down the table, said, "The solution is simple. Just tell people that it is a sin. When you turn on your car, you are sinning. That's all to it." You know what my reaction was? It was so visceral, I can still feel it. I thought to myself, okay, so I live in a place where I don't have access to transportation. And this was some time ago. I can't afford an electric car. So you're saying, I take my child to the doctor, that's a sin. When I go to church, that's a sin. When I go to work to earn money to feed my family, that's a sin. I felt so angry because he was guilting me for something that I felt like I had no choice over. I recognized that I wanted to do differently, but I couldn't. I just felt like going out to the parking lot and finding the Hummer I could, and we were in Texas, so I'm pretty sure I have, and that's back in the days before electric Hummers, let me just note, and just driving around him, leaning out the window, yelling, "Sinning, I'm sinning," because I felt so helpless. What else could I do? The whole idea of guilt-based righteousness, like a brand new set of 10 commandments that we must obey in order to be right in our own eyes and everyone else's, that is going to do us. It is not about our personal righteousness. It is about changing the world. I am not trying to get people to change their lifestyle. I'm trying to get people to change the world. And guess what? When we change the world, all of our lives will change. Not just the people who want to, not just those of us who do try, because I try too, but why? Because I want to do the right thing. I want to not talk the talk. I want to walk the walk too. But when we change the world, everybody's life will change. And that is the only way we can fix this problem. So it's not about guilting people. It's not about shaming people. It's about showing them that there is a better way. And that better way involves fixing climate change, because if we don't fix climate change, we're not going to be able to fix anything else that's wrong with this world.
How, as a Christian, and a climate scientist, do you view the end times? Many Christians view the book of Revelation as a prophecy about what will happen at the end of the world and the return of Jesus. And I wonder, how, do you see it that way? It's even been in a lot of popular Christian media for a long time. When I was growing up, in the 2000s, the Left Behind series was such a popular, young adult fiction about people living through the end times. So, in them now, how do you see that?
That's the second most common religiously sounding objection I hear, which is the world's going to end anyway, so why do we care? Some people even take it to an even more extreme, like, oh, let's hurry things up. Maybe global warming, if it's real, it'll hurry things up. Bring it on. But here's the thing. Again, we go to address religiously sounding objections. We don't go to science. We go to where they come from, or people think they come from, which is the Bible. And when we go there, we discover that people 2,000 years ago were pretty much identical to people today. There were people in the early church saying, oh, well, the world's going to end soon, so I'm just going to quit my job, sort of put my feet up in the metaphorical lazy boy of life. And the Apostle Paul, who was never one to mince words, he wrote to the people in the book of Thessalonians. He said, basically, in so many words, get a job, feed your family, care for the widows and the orphans. You don't know what the end of the world is, but in the meantime, you have things to do. We're called to love others, to care for others, to walk in the good works God prepared for us to do. It doesn't matter when the world's going to end. That is not up to you. What's up to you is what you're doing every day. So that is another common religiously sounding objection. And we talk about it in our Global Weirding episode. What does the Bible say about climate change? Something that I think is really, really important, because what we're trying to do, both of those arguments that you referenced, what are they doing? They are an abdication of responsibility. That's what they are. They're basically saying, oh, I'm small and insignificant. I have no ability, no power, nothing. I can't do anything. Well, you know what? That's what a lot of us are thinking too, but in a different way. I'm just one person. What can I do? My choices don't matter. I feel helpless. A lot of us feel this way. We might not put religious window dressing on it, but we feel that way too. What's the answer to that? That lack of efficacy, that sense of hopelessness. The antidote to despair, to quote Joan Baez, the antidote to that despair is action. So if you're a church, create a team or a creation care team. Do an energy audit church. Look at where you get your food. See if you can put in bike. What about an electric charging station for cars? Swap out your light bulbs and save money. There's so much that we can do every single place where we are. Nobody has an excuse.
Speaking of that, one little detail in your book that fascinated me: the Texas Tech University's recycling program is the result of one dedicated woman. Is that right?
Yes, Melanie Tatum in the department, she hand-sourced the most comprehensive recycling program that includes styrofoam, electronics, glass, as well as all the plastics. And you know what she does? She hires students, which if they're hired and they're out-of-state students, that means they get in-state tuition if they work for the university. That's a huge added bonus. She hires students to do all the sorting. You don't have to go there and sort your recycling into 50 million different bins. And then she pays off the proceeds of the recycling. One woman did that, and she opened it up to the whole town. And then along came COVID and shut it down. So you see, there's all these things that intersect in our lives, all these sort of multipliers that build on each other. But through it all, we see story after story after story. And I talk about this in my book, but we see this in history as well. Story after story of individual people who made a difference simply by using their voice, advocating for change, doing everything they could to make it happen wherever they were planted.
I find it so you save your recycling at home and you take it to campus to like participate in this program, right? Because it's better than what the city of Lubbock offers, right? That's pretty amazing. It's just like the fact that one person's passion project could be the town's recycling system. Yeah.
A town of 300,000 people.
Yeah. Another big up in terms of feeling hopeful. We have this great green bin program. I love it. Where I grew up in Colorado, we don't have anything like that. You can put your organic waste in the green bin and separate it from the trash and the recycling, and know that all your food scraps, including meat, aren't going to generate methane in the landfill. So I don't know. That's just one that gives me a little satisfaction every time I use it.
Oh, so I'm from Toronto, Canada, and we have a green bin there. And I miss it so badly. So if you live in San Antonio, you were so lucky to have that. If you don't know how it works, I bet there's people getting it to you, right, Brendan?
Yeah, it goes right. You have it at home, and you can bring it right home. It's not available for a commercial yet, but well, unless you go with the compost ones who are here. There's a great story in this book, bouncing around a little bit, about a really bad day you had at in, I believe it was Toronto, where your dad was speaking as an astrophysicist, and the person who came up to you that you had met before, and it was just kind of a tough interaction. Do you think you could tell us about that?
Sure. So I don't want to tell you all the stories in the book, because I want you to buy the book or get it from the library or get it on Audible or get it an ebook. That is one of my favorite stories, so I definitely have to tell it. So I was over in the UK on one of my bundled trips. I travel when I have lots and lots of things to do at the same time. So I travel someplace and I do all these things in one place and I travel back. And I was speaking at a conference of Christians in Science. And I was talking to a woman afterwards during the tea break, because they have very civilized tea breaks over there, about, they were asking me about my experience living in the US and how people would often attack me. And so as we were sitting there during the tea break, somebody from the conference came stomping up to the table and said, it was absolutely obsessed with the idea that I was saying that climate was changing and humans are responsible, and we really was true. So that conversation began by disagreeing. What do you think happened? Nothing good. We didn't end the conversation with something we agreed on. We didn't connect the dots to what it mattered to both of us. We didn't talk about positive solutions. It was just entirely focused on the science is wrong, you're wrong, and how dare you say that? So I thought to myself, well, that's one of those learning experiences. And a year later, I was at home in Toronto, and my dad was going to a conference the next day, and he said, well, why don't you come along and just listen to my presentation? I wasn't presenting at all, but I thought, why not? I'm on vacation, but I'm a scientist, so who doesn't love science? I went along to the conference and we went for lunch afterwards, and I left lunch early because my dad got in a big discussion with the dismissive person, and I thought, I just don't think this is going anywhere, so I'm just going to walk out. I walked into the cafeteria, the door slammed shut behind me, And here I was on a university campus I wasn't familiar with in the middle of summer, so there were no students around. The phone was dead, and I didn't know how to get back to the conference. So I was standing there wondering, what am I going to do? And I was looking for people, and there was nobody in sight. When all of a sudden I heard the door open behind me, I whipped around, but before I could say anything, the door slammed shut on them too. They were stuck with me. And guess who it was? It was the guy from the... I recognized him, and he recognized me. And I took a deep breath, and I could see him taking a deep breath too. And so I said, I didn't know where I was. And he said, well, I think we can find our way back. We started to walk off together, and both of us were struggling to find a topic of conversation. He was too. So he looked down at my bag, and he saw the knitting needle sticking out of my bag. And he said, oh, do you knit? And I said, yes, I'm knitting a birthday present for Mom. It's her birthday next week, and I'm making something. And he said, I knit too. I said, really? He said, yes. In fact, our families that we're not going to buy gifts for each other anymore. We're going to make gifts because that's much more meaningful. Who needs more plastic garbage anyways? I said, yes, I completely agree. So as I expressed my agreement with what he was saying, which I fully did, he then went on to tell me how he upcycled all their furniture, how they lived in the city center so they didn't have a car, how they only took one international flight a year. And as I listened, I realized that he was living the most sustainable lifestyle that was rich in what really mattered, in family, in time spent together, in meaningful actions for each other. So when we got to the conference, which is just a minute or two later, I turned to myself, I wish that everybody in the world lived like you did, even if it's the way you do with climate change. He said, really? And I was like, yes, I really mean it. We went in, I finished my mom's scarf, and that was the last time I saw him. But that showed me that what we do is more important than what we believe often. And if we can agree on solutions, it doesn't matter why. Somebody could want wind turbines because the check arrives in the mail. Somebody else could want wind turbines because they know that they replace coal-fired power. It doesn't matter as long as we can agree on what we're actually doing. That's what matters.
I'd love to take some audience questions right now for anyone who has a question for Katherine. We're working with a bit of a mic range limitation here, so you have to come to the front. Sorry about that. It could be you, but I'm going to lose mic power. If you have a question for Katherine, if you'd love you to come up here. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you, Katherine, what does climate science tell us about what's happening to the natural world in terms of migration? We're here at the Monarch Butterfly and Pollinator Festival. What are we seeing in terms of birds, insects, and how that migration is shifting?
So I am chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. Nature Conservancy is the biggest conservation organization in the world. They work in 72 countries around the world, and they're very concerned about biodiversity loss and conservation. So why is a climate scientist a scientist? It's because they know that climate change is a multiplier. Climate change is affecting the migration of species. Species that migrate based on temperature cues are changing when and where they migrate. But species that migrate or that come out due to diurnal cues, like where the sun is, they're not changing. So we are seeing ecosystem disruption where species that migrate based on diurnal cues are arriving at where all the young are expecting all these nice caterpillars to be. The caterpillars have already hatched and turned into other things because they change based on the temperature. So we're seeing climate change is actually disrupting that timing, what they call the phenology of natural ecosystems. It's also allowing invasive species to spread throughout Texas, like fire ants. Climate change didn't introduce fire ants to Texas. That's not. But our winters up here used to be cold enough to keep them at bay. They're not cold enough anymore. Kudzu used to be known as the vine that ate the South. Well, guess what? Kudzu is eating the Midwest and Southern Ontario now. We are seeing mass migrations in the natural environment. But here's the good news. The good news is that by investing in nature, we can help fix climate change. Why? Because nature is full of carbon. Carbon in the soil, carbon in ecosystems is good. So when we restore coastal ecosystems, they protect us from storm surge during hurricanes. But they also filter clean the water and they take up carbon. We restore ecosystems and forests and degrade it. It provides habitat, it cleans up our air, and it stores carbon. Nature-based solutions are amazing. Here out in West Texas, when farmers plant a cover crop, it sucks up carbon from the atmosphere. They plow that cover crop back into the ground. All that carbon goes into the ground instead of the atmosphere, and it fertilizes the soil to where they produce amazing cotton yields compared to their neighbors. And the neighbors are like, what's your secret? Is it a secret fertilizer you're not telling us about? And they're like, yeah, it's a secret fertilizer called carbon. So nature-based solutions are absolutely amazing. And by investing in nature and letting nature help us, we can help nature too. It is literally a win-win-win.
There's been really interesting research and different projects coming together of farmers to store carbon in the ground, not just for the value of their crop, but for value of, serving all of us by storing carbon that way. You've mentioned the book, some individual farmers. Can you just talk about some kind of exciting projects going on in that regard?
Yeah, smart agriculture is amazing because, again, carbon in the soil is like miracle grow on steroids, one ag professor told me. And so not only cover crops, for example, no-till agriculture, also biochar, where we burn agricultural waste at high temperatures and then carbon comes out as a gray powder, and then you can plow it back into the soil and it's amazing fertilizer. There's all kinds of things that farmers can do. Farmers can be climate heroes. They can help put carbon back in the ground where we want it instead of the atmosphere where we do. And you know what? It helps them too because it helps them grow better crops.
Just a reminder that we'd love to hear any questions you might have for Katherine, but want to come on, I'd love to read them. For those of us who live in cities, the city of San Antonio actually wanted to ask a couple questions about cities and their climate action plans, and you actually did some climate modeling for San Antonio, even like 2014, 2015. We put our climate plan in 2019 to adhere to the balance of the Paris Accord, which in other words means carbon neutral by 2050. We either take in more, we either offset or stop producing the same amount that we're, I think I'm saying it wrong, I'm sorry. What is a city's role in this? It's hard for the city to set energy policy on a giant scale. They don't really have that huge of a regulatory power to say, natural gas industry, we San Antonio can tell you unilaterally what to do. But cities can do a lot. Right?
A huge amount. So the majority of us live in cities, right? And cities, first of all, understand what's happening in that city because it's such a small area. What happens in one part of the city affects us all. Cities also have the ability to change much more quickly than at the state or the federal level. Cities have incredible power to change, almost like living labs, to look at what they can do in terms of water planning, energy use, public health, infrastructure, transportation, and more. Cities are really at the cutting edge of climate solutions. San Antonio is one of the cities. San Antonio was just joined last year by Houston. The city of Houston now has a climate action plan that they're meeting their Paris to. Austin does too. The city of Dallas has been powering its own operations off clean energy for several years already. And change is happening. And here in Texas, our cities are leading the way. Let me give you a tangible example of how powerful cities can be in the fight against climate change. One of the first cities I worked with was Chicago. And I still remember, that was back in the days when climate action plans weren't a thing that most cities did. So they brought in me and another climate scientist, and they put us in a room with people from all different city departments. And they gave us a sack lunch. I still remember that, really a bag lunch. And they basically were like, don't come out, we've decided what to do. I didn't phrase it quite that sternly, but that was definitely the message. You could tell a lot of people in that room were like, I work for emergency services. Why am I here? I work for the school board. Why am I here? I work for the part of the city that does our summer festivals. Why am I here? So I started talking about what's happening. I started talking about how our high temperature days are increasing and how our summers are getting a lot hotter and humid. The festival worked up and they said, oh, well, we noticed that when it's really hot and humid, nobody shows up for our outdoor festivals, and they're very big in Chicago. And then I started talking about how we could actually make projections for how many days per year or how often we go above certain temperature thresholds, like 90 degrees or 95 degrees. So the emergency response department said, oh, 92 degrees. I said, yeah, of course, we do 92 degrees. Why? And they said, we staff by the thermometer. The lower income neighborhoods in Chicago, which were redlined, which was historical racist practice, they have much higher urban heat island effect. It can be up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit hotter in those neighborhoods during a heat wave. And when it gets hot, we see health emergencies, we see violence, tempers flare, people can't pay their air conditioning bill, they don't want to open the window at night to cool off because they're afraid to do so. We staff by the thermometer. Can you give us projections? I said, yes. And the Chicago Transit Authority said, oh, projections? Can you tell us about how much, how often we're going to get above 2.4 inches of rain? I said, what, 2.4 inches? They said, well, but that's because we have to shut down a lot of the bus routes. And we have to reroute them. It costs us a lot of money. And we also have to shut down the train, the rapid transit train, when it's too hot because the rails warp. That costs us a lot of money too. But if we knew how often we'd be getting those days over a certain threshold in the future, we would know when to proactively start replacing the rails. So we wouldn't have to keep shutting them down. So we just went on and on and on and on, finding all these different ways that climate change was affecting city operations, the energy used by the school board, the combined sewer overflow problem, violated the International Joint Convention on the Great Lakes, so it was a pretty big deal. All these different ways that the city was being affected. A lot of them had to do with heat. So then people started talking about, well, what could we do to lower our urban heat island effect? Because cities are a lot more than the surrounding area, because the surrounding areas are often green and forested with grass and trees, but the cities are a lot dark material that just soaks up the sun's energy. So the city of Chicago decided they were going to implement a green roof program, and they were going to plant trees, but not trees that are native to Chicago today, trees that will be native to Chicago when the trees reach maturity. So we worked with the Arboretum to identify tree species that are native to further south in Illinois today to put them in Chicago now, so that when they reach maturity, they'll be at the perfect climate for those trees. And then also putting in green roofs around the city, because not only does it save energy use for the building, and not only does it provide a beautiful place for people to go and have their lunch, but it also helps to cool down the city. And so the goal of the city is to lower their urban heat island effect by about the same amount that climate change is pushing up their temperature. That is the incredible power of cities to act.
What's exciting is that one of those programs you listed, just about, we have some version of that here in San Antonio too. So they may not be quite as far as Chicago, but we have them. And so it's a good note to end for sure. Thank you so much for joining us, Catherine. We've all learned so much from you, and I hope you feel inspired about having these conversations. The book again is called Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope in Healing the Divided World. And also make sure to check out Catherine's YouTube series, Global Weirding. You will learn on there too. Thanks again so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. This has been such a pleasure. Okay. Thank you everybody for coming out. So if you still have a ticket, you are welcome to go over our plants that you can take home with you to start your own rain garden. So if you can just show that you have a ticket and you hung out, you're up first. If we still have plants left over, anybody that doesn't have a ticket is welcome to go get it. I'll poke at you and let you know if that's the case. And then coming up next is TPR streaming series. So stick around. Also, Austin's going to hang out if you want to make for free a really cool stamp made from recycled paper. We're going to keep doing some of the plants for a little bit longer if you want to take home your own pollinator plant. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you next time.